Solvers have changed poker, but a lot of players find them confusing and overwhelming. This video is meant to help those players. Let's talk about solvers, how they work, and why you should care. What is a solver and how does it work? Super simplified. A poker solver is a program that demonstrates unexploitable poker strategies, which you can learn and reference to help you make better decisions at the table and have a better overall poker strategy and understanding of where your EV comes from. Let's talk quickly about how a poker solver figures out these unexploitable strategies. Let's start with two players. We'll call them Alice and Bob. They can just be playing a random strategy to begin with, pressing any sorts of buttons. What we do with a poker solver is we take our Bob and Alice here, and we lock Alice's strategy. So Alice on the right here has a poker strategy. She decides to play certain hands, fold certain hands, call certain hands at random to begin with. The solver locks Alice's strategy in place, and then Bob tries to find the best response to that random strategy. Once Bob has finalized their adjustments, it flips. We now lock Bob's strategy, and we let Alice recreate a new strategy to try and take the most advantage of Bob's strategy. This process is repeated thousands or millions or even billions of times depending on the length of time that a solver's run for, and eventually the strategies settle where no more improvements can be made by either party. At such a point, whether we have a strategy locked or unlocked, there is no further change happening in those two strategies. That final stage is called the equilibrium, represents the game theory optimal strategy, GTO for short, which is a term you may have heard at home. That is why poker solvers are so powerful, because they show us strategies developed over these millions of iterations which are unexploitable and where neither player has room to improve. So now you know how a poker solver works. Let's talk about how to read a poker solver. If you've never looked at a poker solver before, the image on the left can be pretty overwhelming, but it's what we call a hand matrix. It shows every possible starting hand in poker, with pocket aces being at the top, pocket twos being at the bottom right, ace two suited at the top right, and ace two off at the bottom left. On the top, we have an ace-x. The various colors display the actions that equilibrium strategies take. So for example, in this case, we have the blue is folding, the yellow is calling, and the orange is orange? Let's say orange. Orange is raising. What this means is that if we were to look at this particular spot, I believe this is a big blind versus button, and we'd have king nine offsuit. King nine offsuit would be a call. If we were to have ace king would always be a raise, whether suited or offsuit. If we had a hand like pocket eights, it would be sometimes raised and sometimes called, and that is randomization. We'll talk about that in future. But a solver will show you how that unexploitable strategy will deal with various situations facing whichever action you want to input. Now, maybe you're new to solvers and you want to know an easy way that you can start using solvers to help improve your game. Let's talk about one of the simplest and best things you can do if you're a less experienced poker player and you're new to solvers. Start by using the pre-flop ranges that you see in the solver as a guide in terms of the kind of hands you should play. Let's take an example. Jack 7 suited. Now, sometimes in poker, Jack 7 suited is a very fine hand to be playing. Here, for example, we see in a cash game, when folded 2 on the button, we should always be raising Jack 7 suited, and folding it would be a mistake in equilibrium play. Sometimes Jack 7 suited is a very poor hand to play and is losing you chips. In this case, we have the same cash game, but instead we're in the low jack, or we're under the gun with the first two act, and now Jack 7 suited will be costing you money long term if you were to raise it. It can be tricky for newer players and the less experienced poker players to understand and appreciate that flexibility of the starting ranges. The difference that you're playing the button versus the cutoff versus the hijack, the difference in terms of facing a raise, facing a 3-bet, facing a 4-bet, and it can be very costly when people often try and come to a poker game with preset ideas about, I'm only going to play this range of hands. Using a solver to help build that experience and that knowledge base about which are the profitable hands to play and which aren't the profitable hands to play, it's one of the best things you can do if you find that you're currently playing lots of hands that should be just immediate folds, or it might be that you're folding lots of hands that are very profitable raises or calls. In both cases, you're leaving lots of chips out there on the table that a solver can easily help you gather up and help bring that extra profit to your poker game. Here we are on Lucid, and let's take a look at a cash game, for example. I think it's very easy for a lot of opponents to make certain mistakes, and so we'll just talk very quickly about some of them. So for example, if the low jack was to open, you can see already how tight the hijack should be. This I think is really important, where a lot of us, probably most of you in your home games, are naturally playing much wider than this. If you're playing ace 10 versus a raise, you're making a theoretical equilibrium error. Now, it still may be worth it. For example, maybe your opponent's raising much wider than this, etc. Maybe the guys behind are very poor. However, it's really good idea to understand the thresholds here. To give an extreme example, let's say the low jack was to raise and the hijack was to 3-bet, and you're in the cutoff with a hand like ace queen off, you should never play that hand if your opponents are playing equilibrium strategies and you would like to make money in poker. You should fold ace queen always in that situation. If we were to say on the button and there was a raise, a re-raise, and a re-raise in front of you, you should fold ace king nearly all the time. But also, as we mentioned, it's making sure that you're playing wide enough in situations. You can see here on the button that we should be playing very, very wide. If you're folding 7-4 suited on the button in a cash game, 200 big blind is effective. You're leaving chips out there in regards to equilibrium play. So very quickly, just a few buttons, you can see the fluidity of the pre-flop ranges here, and having a better understanding of that is a really good idea and really easy to do once you've got Lucid Poker or any other solver for that matter. Second tip when it comes to using a solver if you're a bit less experienced is to focus on EV. EV stands for expected value. It is a measurement of how many chips or big blinds you expect to win in the long run with various actions with your hands. But obviously aces, for example, would have the highest EV pre-flop. A big way though you can improve as a beginner when you think about your poker game is actually not by trying to find the hero play. A really good way that poker players end up making significant gains when it comes to their poker strategy is by reducing the big errors that they're making. Oftentimes it can be tempting to try and find the sort of super high level play, but often if a player is just playing the wrong hands pre-flop, or if they're making big errors in terms of calling with hands, betting hands, raising hands, etc., eliminating these mistakes is a really, really good idea. Now, we don't want to overly focus on EV in terms of making any error. Even full-time professionals will make small errors when it comes to their poker strategy, but what they'll very rarely do is make a big EV error, unless of course they had a very good reason to do that error based on maybe some reads or some strategy, etc. If you take 1.5 for example, that would be a relatively big EV error. That would certainly be pre-flop, be a very big EV error to make. 0.01, something like that. Those are less important EV errors. People make 0.01 EV errors a lot. We're obviously not trying to make those EV errors. If you fold a hand that you should raise, or if you raise a hand that you should fold and you get a 0.01, it will add up over the thousands of hands. However, in the short term, focus on those big EV errors that you're making when you review your hands and try and figure out what's going on. If you are reviewing a hand and you find that you made a massive EV error without actually realizing it, those are great spots to then dive a little deeper into the solver and figure out what did you miss in terms of not realizing this was a big EV error. Can you then focus on that in terms of growing that knowledge base and understanding in future in that situation, perhaps you'll be less likely to make a big EV error. Now, as you become more experienced, one of the things to remember is that these are guides and they represent equilibrium play. It still may be that, for example, let's say you were to make a bluff catch on the river and you think your opponent's under bluffing, you may make an exploitable fold and it's close and you decide I'm going to fold this hand even though long term it's winning, 0.04, let's say, or something like that. That won't necessarily be a bad thing, but what's a really good idea when you're trying to learn the game of poker is to figure out the fundamentals first, and then from that you can then make exploitative adjustments with the realization of the equilibrium strategy to make sure that you're sort of processing and figuring out these spots in the right kind of way. So when it comes to that strategy and EV error, you can see the numbers are here. When we look at a really bad hand, you can see that the bad hands loses more than, let's say, the borderline hands, which are break even, and that's natural, right? If you're in the big blind versus button, which is this spot, you're going to not make money calling the big blind against the button raise with 7-2 off. With a hand like Jack 8 off or Queen 8 off, it's pretty marginal, it's pretty close. If you were to make a call with Jack 8 off, you're not going to be costing yourself loads of money in the long run. If, for example, you decide that you're going to call with 10-4 off, you are going to be costing yourself a lot of money in the long run, and regularly making these calls is going to be a big error that you want to eliminate from your game. When we're talking about the mixed hands, it's not overly important as a beginner or a less experienced player that you have a balanced 3-bet strategy initially, but what is quite important is you get these thresholds approximately right. Now, you can be a little bit off, it's not going to be the end of the world. If you're playing hands like Queen 3 off to the button raise, if you're playing hands like 6-2 off, if you're even playing hands like 9-2 suited, they will be costing you money long term. And again, a big part of how you're going to improve as a poker player isn't always by finding the sort of insane, sick hero call or big bluff. It's about getting a lot of the fundamentals correct and eliminating those big EV errors that you might be making in your game. Now, we're going to have future videos where we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of using a solver at various formats of the game type, from the low stakes to the high stakes. So if you'd like to tune into some of those, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to see a video where we delve a little deeper into some of the more advanced strategies that you'll see, you can take a look at this river betting strategy right here, maybe.